Welcome to part 2 of every manufacturer's best themed coaster. If you missed part 1, I'll link it in the end screen and in the link below. But for part 2, let's get started. Morgan, West Coaster at the Santa Monica Pier in Santa Monica, California. This is a tough one because Morgan didn't build very many roller coasters and none of them are particularly well themed. Outside of the decal of the vehicles themselves, there really isn't much theming on West Coaster either. Granted, it does have a beautiful setting right next to the water. This 1,300 foot long, 55 foot tall, 35-mile-an-hour coaster is one of the more iconic coasters of this size in the world. Like I've said before, if you watch LA sporting events, you'll see this on some sort of drone shot. Iconic, yes. Well themed, no. PAX was a tough one. I couldn't really find a coaster that even qualifies as themed in any sort of sense. So if you know of one, please let me know down in the comments. And just as a forewarning, there are a few more manufacturers that I wasn't sure of. Pinfari, Wacky Worms, various parks. Granted, most Wacky Worms have no theming, but some of them go through an apple or some sort of structure, which is why I'm including them. This is included on a good amount of Wacky Worms, and it's kinda something a little. So yeah, there's not a whole lot for Pinfari as far as themed coasters go. Premier Rides, Revenge of the Mummy at various Universal parks. Granted, the layouts for these coasters aren't the same, but the theming is very similar for each coaster. Of the three out there, I've ridden the version at Universal Studios Hollywood in Southern California, and I gotta say, it was much better than I was anticipating and a really awesome attraction. That particular version has a punchy launch at the beginning, a surprise airtime moment in the dark, and a backwards section. As I said, these three layouts aren't identical, but they all are very immersive indoor coasters. Universal really knows how to theme up their rides. I also couldn't find anything remotely themed from either Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters or PTC or the Roller Coaster Corporation of America or RCCA. Both of these were wooden coaster manufacturers, PTC clearly being the better of the two, but not much theming. It gets better from here, I promise. RMC, Fire in the Hole at Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. So this one is kind of a cheat and also not really. Fire in the Hole was a dark ride roller coaster that originally opened at Silver Dollar City in 1972. But it closed in 2023 to make way for a new version of the ride, manufactured by Rocky Mountain Construction. So while RMC didn't build this from the ground up, they've had such a big part in this refurbishment that RCDB now has it listed as a RMC manufactured coaster. That's good enough for me, and because this is basically a dark ride, there was really no competition from the rest of Rocky Mountain Construction's catalog. S&S John Wick Open Contract, located at Motion Gate Dubai in the UAE. This is a pretty traditional S&S free spin, but the pre-loading and queue section appears to have some nice theming. It appears to be kind of an odd choice for a John Wick themed roller coaster, but hey, if you're a John Wick fan, now you have a new coaster to add to your bucket list. The ride itself is pretty traditional though, 1,019 feet of track, a height of 120 feet, a drop of 54 feet, and a speed of just 38 miles an hour, but it's all about those flips. These coasters are fun, and each ride is different. You seem to get different flips because the weight on each ride, so that's a unique experience for sure, and I enjoy them. SPF Visa Aventura at Safari Park in Ecuador. I'm sorry guys, I know this is underwhelming, but there just doesn't seem to be very many well-themed SPF Visa coasters. Something funny I did find though is that in the country of Georgia, and I didn't know that was a country, so that's cool. In the country of Georgia, there's a roller coaster by SPF Visa called Doggy Dog. This is basically a wacky worm and it goes through an apple, like a caterpillar, but it's a dog. So that's weird, but let's go to Schwarzkopf Psyche Underground at Walibi, Belgium in Belgium. Finally, we actually have a legitimately themed coaster. This is the familiar shuttle loop layout, featuring 722 feet of track, a height of 137 feet, a speed of 53 miles an hour, and one vertical loop taken forwards and backwards. Obviously, the main difference is that this one is placed entirely indoors. For that reason, it's probably one of the better Schwarzkopf shuttle loops still left standing, or really ever built. I'm not sure why they did this, maybe just thought it would be cool, and it does look really cool. I want to ride this coaster one day and experience what a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop feels like indoors, probably more intense. Skyline Attractions, Brava at Mount Mocha in North Adams, Massachusetts. This one's really interesting. So the ride itself isn't actually that well themed, but it's located in a museum, and the theme is that roller coasters are art. I'm not sure if this really counts as theming necessarily, but they're looking at this coaster in a different way than most of the other coasters at other parks. This isn't an attraction, it is ultimately a piece of art. I've tried to avoid defunct coasters on this list, and this one did close last month. However, it's so unique and such a cool thing that I felt like I had to include it. Shout out to Skyline Attractions for pitching in on this cool idea. Togo Flounders Flying Fish Coaster at Tokyo Disney Sea in Japan. This is one of my top bucket list parks in the world, and it brings us Togo's best themed coaster, at least the best one I could find. If you couldn't tell by now, this is a pretty small coaster. It only has 787 feet of track, and it only goes 20 miles an hour. But for what it's worth, there are some nice visuals with the rockwork and other things. If one thing's for sure, you can always count on Disney to dress up their kiddie coasters. Vekoma, Expedition Everest at Disney's Animal Kingdom in Orlando, Florida. Speaking of Disney, this is one of the world's best themed coasters. Located in the Asia section of the park, the mountain facade is imposing, and the coaster itself is tons of fun. This ride originally cost Disney $100 million, and I've always said that it was $100 million well spent. This is such a complete coaster from start to finish, and it starts in the queue. The queue sets the stage and sets the story forth of the Yeti. The mountain is incredibly well done, and you spend most of the ride either in it or going around it. Then, of course, who can forget that famous backwards section with the surprisingly intense indoor helix in the dark. Through its 3,800 feet of track, this is about as complete of a family thrill ride you can get. Awesome ride. Weekend, Buffalo Hunt at Fort Hays Chuck Wagon in Rapid City, South Dakota. So this is a really interesting one once again. Weekend mostly builds alpine coasters, and outside of the settings, none of those really have much theming. Buffalo Hunt is in some ways an alpine coaster, but it's an inverted attraction. Along with the unique ride system, there are buffaloes placed throughout the ride experience, and riders are equipped with little laser guns that they fire at targets throughout the experience. It's a really odd combination, and I'm not sure how well it works, but there is some level of theming with this at least. Thrill-wise, this is less thrilling than your traditional alpine coaster, but between the swinging, inverted element and the shooting element, it could be more enjoyable for kids or more enjoyable to some. Mostly though, it's just weird. Zamperla, Puss in Boots Giant Journey at Universal Studios Singapore in Singapore. This is another kind of odd attraction that's inverted. The cars being inverted is the only thing this and Buffalo Hunt have in common though. There are multiple animatronics and figures throughout the layout to enforce the theme of Puss in Boots. Why did they choose an inverted coaster for this type of ride layout? I have no idea, but it's interesting. Unsurprisingly, it's not a stat monster. 1,400 feet of track, 56 foot height, 24 mile an hour speed. This is all about the visuals from start to finish. Universal does theming very well, and to me, this looks like one of their lower tier attractions, but a lower tier Universal attraction is still a pretty well themed ride in comparison to most other parks and coasters. Last one is Zier, Dragon at various Legoland parks. These rides can be found everywhere, but not all the dragons at the Legoland parks are built by Zier. Here in the States, of the 3 Legoland parks, the only one that has a Zier coaster is the Legoland New York, the newest park. Granted, these Zier coasters don't really have good theming during the layout. The theming comes before the actual ride experience. It's in the dark ride section. Granted, that is ultimately a part of the ride experience, but there's no thrilling drops or anything in there. However, these dark ride sections, while they are slightly different from one another, are all well done. For adults, this is probably the highlight of the ride, and the dragon at the end is the highlight for me. A nice job by Merlin on these dark ride sections, and that brings us to the end of part 2 of every manufacturer's best themed coaster. In some ways, this was kind of an episode of a bunch of weird, obscure rides, but it is what it is. I hope you had fun coming along, and as always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I would encourage you to do so. Thank you all again, and I'll see you in the next video.